All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Body System Summit Episode 5. So today we are going to be talking about the cardiovascular system. So just to kind of recap thus far, we have talked about the digestive system, we've talked about the accessory organs of the digestive system, the liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder. We have discussed the immune system, and then last week was the urinary system. So we're kind of shifting gears a little bit into the cardiovascular system, but again, you will really start seeing more and more connections between these different body systems and how they all impact one another. So I will go ahead and jump right in. Okay, so the cardiovascular system consists of the heart, the blood, and the blood vessels. So the terms cardiovascular system and circulatory system are used interchangeably. So you may hear me say one or the other, but they are the same thing. So the primary function of this system is transport of oxygen and nutrients to all of the parts of the body. So there's nowhere in the body that doesn't require a blood supply. It also sends blood to the lungs and removes carbon dioxide from the blood. So it's kind of another one of our cleaning systems, right? We've already talked about how the digestion kind of acts as a cleaning system. We've talked about the kidneys, how they act as a cleaning system, the liver. So this is another one, all right? So we have to remove carbon dioxide from our blood so that we don't become acidotic or suffocate, one or the other. So the heart is the pump that pushes blood through the body. All right, so we all have felt our heartbeat before. So every time our heart is beating, it is pumping blood in and out of it. So the arteries are the blood vessels that carry oxygenated blood to the organs. And this blood, or these appear more red, okay? And then the veins return the used blood to the heart. And that blood is devoid of oxygen, which is why it's blue. Okay, so important to know the difference. So again, arteries always go away from the heart and veins come to the heart. And then there it's re-oxygenated through the lungs. And then the capillaries are these very teeny tiny blood vessels that we have, and they connect arteries and veins together. And they are also found in some of the smaller organs like your eyeballs, for example. So very, very small. And this is where gas exchange occurs. So this is where oxygen is given off and carbon dioxide is taken up. The circulatory system also supports the heart's electrical system. So it's important to know that the heart is electric, literally. So in addition to that blood that's pumping in and out, it is also giving out electrical signals. And this process is largely driven by electrolytes. So you've probably heard that term before. Electrolytes are either positive or negatively charged molecules. These include sodium, potassium, magnesium, chloride, calcium. Okay, so these are part of that electrical system. And the electrical system of the heart is stimulated by the vagus nerve. And so the vagus nerve has come up many times, right? We've talked about the vagus nerve and digestion. We've talked about the vagus nerve and the immune system, and now we're talking about it in the context of the heart and the circulatory system. So suffice it to say, the vagus nerve is pretty critical in pretty much all of these processes. Okay, so this is a little graphic to show you how circulation works. This also includes the lymphatic system, which we covered during immunity. But just again, to sort of show you how it sort of ties in together. All right, they're both part of our systemic circulation. But pulmonary circulation occurs first. So you can see the pulmonary artery, which is receiving the oxygenated blood from the heart. All right, and then the carbon dioxide that is put off, some of it we exhale out, but some of it is also discharged into the pulmonary vein, taken back to the heart to be re-oxygenated. Okay, so these are the atria and the ventricles respectively. So your left atrium and ventricle and your right atrium and ventricle. So you can see it's literally a circuit. Okay, so it's circulating. So it makes a big circle all the way through. And then the arteries will carry them out to various body. We have hundreds of arteries that go to our various organs and tissues. And so They all kind of get distributed here. And then again, once the oxygen is used up from the blood, it is carried back through the veins to the heart. So you can see there's this beautiful little system of it just going right around a little circle. And then kind of stemming off of that is the lymphatic vessels, all right, which will circulate lymph through the lymph nodes as well. Okay, so this is an illustration of the vagus nerve and how it innervates, which means it provides nervous system functions. It innervates the cardiac system. Okay, so here's your vagus nerve. This is the stem of your brain here. Okay, so your medulla oblongata and your pons. So this is the bottom part of your brain, kind of right where it sits above your spinal cord. All right, and then here is your spinal column. So the vagus nerve, which is your cerebral nerve number 10, all right, sends a signal to the heart, and typically when the signal is being sent out, it's a decelerator. So this is regulating the heart rate, keeping it from going too high, okay? And then you have a cardiac nerve, which goes through something called sympathetic ganglia in the nervous system. This is the accelerator. Oops, too fast. Slow down, Gene. Okay, so again, and then the signal travels back upward through the vagus nerve. So again, even this is a kind of a round system. It's a circuit. So just like any other electrical circuit, whether it's a battery or any other form of electricity that you see in the world, it's the same process in the body. You have to close the circuit. All right, so let's get into some statistics about cardiovascular disease. I'm going to abbreviate it as CVD just for the sake of not saying it so much. So CVD statistics. So this refers to any number of diseases that affect the heart or the blood vessels. So this includes various things, but coronary artery disease, heart failure, heart attacks, angina, which is just a fancy word for chest pain. It is currently the leading cause of death in the United States between both men and women. So CVD kills more people than cancer. It kills more people than diabetes, kidney disease, anything else. Okay, about 500,000 people annually will die from CVD. There's a death about every 34 seconds if you kind of break it down. About every 40 seconds, someone has a heart attack. May or may not be fatal. They're not always fatal, fortunately. But over the age of 20, okay, so we start seeing this as early as 20 years old, people. All right, so I just want to kind of rest on that for a second. 20 million adults over the age of 20 have coronary artery disease. So coronary artery disease is where the main artery to the heart, okay, is either blocked or sclerosing, which means hardening. It's damaged in some way. Okay. The annual healthcare burden of CVD is about $229 billion. Okay, so we are bleeding money. I was not trying to make a pun, but there you go. We are bleeding money into the treatment of CVD, and it is almost entirely preventable. So some of the risk factors for CVD include age. Men are more likely to have CVD than women. Race, so Black people have a higher risk of CVD. Smoking and vaping. A lot of people get in this idea that vaping is better for you, but I'm here to tell you it is not, right? It is still a risk factor for CVD. Family history, of course, if you have some genetic factors, then being sedentary. I mean, that sort of makes sense, doesn't it? Because if you're not exercising your heart, and you're not moving and you're not promoting good circulation, then you are not, you actually need to keep your blood vessels elastic. They are elastic and pliable. So being sedentary does not really promote them being kind of exercised as well. Obesity, a high stress lifestyle. So you may be active, you may be female, you may not smoke, you may be white, like you may not have some of these other risk factors, but if you're under a lot of stress constantly, this is certainly a risk factor. Okay. And part of it is that vagus nerve thing that we talked about. Diabetes, certainly, high blood pressure, which is not considered a cardiovascular disease. It's a separate condition, but having it will certainly eventually cause damage to the blood vessels because of that constant pressure over time. Excessive alcohol intake as well. Alcohol is damaging to the heart, so you have to be careful there. An imbalance of your dietary sodium and potassium. So this is important to recognize also, because it's not just you eat too much salt. Okay, salt in and of itself is not a problem. Okay, so adding salt to your food is not what causes high blood pressure. It is not what causes heart disease. Part of it is the imbalance of sodium and potassium. So if you're eating a ton of sodium in your diet and you're not balancing out with potassium, you're not eating enough potassium, in other words, that can be a risk factor. Low testosterone in men as well. I should point that out as well. So if you're a man and you have what they're now calling low T, that accelerates your risk level as well. Excessive sugar intake, because again, eating excess amounts of sugar is damaging to the arteries, okay? And having a lot of sugar in your blood, i.e. if you're diabetic or even what they call pre-diabetic, it does cause inflammation within the blood vessels and it can cause damage to them. And then an imbalance of your omega-6 to your omega-3 fats. So I think I've touched on omegas a little bit already, but basically you want to have a good intake of omega-3s. And these are going to mostly come from your fatty fish like salmon and tuna, mackerel, herring, sardines, that sort of thing. You can also get some from flax seeds, avocados, olive oil. All right. Whereas foods high in omega-6 are fried foods and seed oils. Okay, so things like avocado oil and sunflower oil, canola oil, that sort of thing. So omega-3 will promote a lower state of inflammation, where eating too much omega-6 will promote a higher state of inflammation. So you can't avoid omega-6. Like it's in a lot of things, including some of those things I named that are good sources of omega-3. You just need to have that balance between them. Yeah, and in terms of your blood work, so a lot of times when you go to your annual physical, you have your blood levels done. They do look at your sodium, your potassium, your magnesium, sometimes your magnesium, maybe if you're lucky, they'll check that, your chloride. So if you see a high or a low potassium or magnesium or whatever, that is not an indicator of your body's actual stores of those nutrients. Okay, so the electrolytes are a little bit different in terms of how they show up in blood work. So the electrolytes are what show up in blood work, not your magnesium. So if your potassium level is high or your sodium level is high in a blood test, that's probably, if you don't have anything wrong with your kidneys or anything, it could just be that you're dehydrated or something like that. So it's typically not very telling. So don't take that to mean like, oh my God, I'm eating too much sodium or I'm eating too much potassium. That's not really indicative of what's going on in the grand scheme of things. So just wanted to point that out. Okay, so I sort of showed you this already with the anatomy of the heart. There are two ventricles, which are the lower parts of the heart, and the atria, which are the upper parts, and you have left and right ones. The ventricles and the atria take turns contracting, so this is what makes your heart beat. So that's why it goes ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. All right, so one beat is the ventricle and the other little bum is the atria. So they're taking turns. The right side receives the deoxygenated blood. So this receives the blue blood, remember, from the veins, and it sends it to the lungs. And the lungs will oxygenate it. And the left side receives the oxygenated blood from the lungs and sends it out to the body. So again, this is kind of illustrated in that little drawing that I showed you guys. but it always goes in the same direction no matter what. Now we have 4 layers of tissue in our heart. Number 1 being the myocardium, and the myocardium is the heart muscle itself. So that's like the main. So if you have heard the term myocardial infarction, which is the medical term for a heart attack, that is what they're referring to. So that's where that occurs. The endocardium lines the inside of the heart, and this protects the valves and the chambers of the heart. So it keeps them all safe inside there. The pericardium is this very thin little layer, and it surrounds all of the other parts of the heart. And then the epicardium is inside the pericardium. So it's like an inner layer of that. That's mostly connective tissue. Connective tissue literally just meaning tissue that connects 2 other tissues together. So that's kind of that inner layer. And then you have 4 valves in the heart, which are the mitral valve, the aortic valve, the pulmonary valve, and the tricuspid. And this shows you a little closer up of the valves. All right, so again, here, this is your main vein in your body. This is your vena cava, which is the vein that kind of runs through the center. So this one comes from the body with the deoxygenated blood. Here's the superior vena cava. So they're both the same vent thing. They run through the center of the heart. So this it's kind of hard to see, but this is like a hole that it kind of runs through, okay, through this atrium. And then here is your tricuspid valve. So this connects the right atrium and ventricle. The pulmonary valve connects the right ventricle to the pulmonary artery. All right, so the pulmonary artery carries the blood to the lung. All right, the aortic valve here separating these 2 ventricles, and then the mitral valve connects the left atrium and ventricle. Okay, and again, you can see the vessels coming in from the lungs, the pulmonary veins, and then the pulmonary artery would be this one here. And then you have the aorta, which this is your main artery in your body. So this is a very thick blood vessel, and this is what carries blood from the heart to the respective smaller arteries to different parts of the body. This is just an illustration of the heart wall of the different layers of tissue. Okay, so here's your myocardium, which again is your main heart tissue or the heart muscle. Here's your endocardium here. This is your visceral pericardium. So this is what's called the heart wall. And then this is a cavity called the pericardial cavity in that little gap there. All right, so again, the heart rate is the rate at which the heart pumps. All right, so when you're hearing it beating, that's your heart rate. So that's another thing that your doctor checks normally is to see what your heart rate is. When your heart rate is normal and the rhythm is steady, that's called sinus rhythm. Most people have between 60 to 100 beats per minute. That's pretty average, normal heart rate. Now, if the heart rate is abnormal, this is called an arrhythmia. All right, so anything where it's not beating at those regular intervals. Tachycardia is where the heart is beating too fast. Bradycardia is where it's going too slow. AFib or atrial fibrillation, usually they abbreviate it as AFib. This means that the electrical impulses are unstable and the atria is like quivering, it's like spasming kind of. This can also happen in the ventricles, which is VFib. And this is where those unstable electrical impulses cause the ventricles to erratically contract and contract very rapidly. So they're just kind of spazzing out. Has multiple causes. Anxiety can do this. So if anybody's ever been really anxious or really upset, sometimes you'll feel your heart kind of fluttering. Stress can certainly do this. High blood pressure, too much caffeine. So if you've had too much coffee on a given day, you may experience that. Smoking, so like nicotine from vapes or smoking or even nicotine patches can do this because that is a stimulant. Asthma inhalers. All right, so if you've ever had to use an inhaler for asthma and you felt your heart racing a bit after. And then any kind of stimulant drug like cocaine, which hopefully nobody here is doing, but I'm gonna just throw it out there just in case. All right, blood pressure. So this is created by the pumping of the heart. So it's literally the amount of pressure the blood is creating against the arteries. Okay, so you have two numbers in your blood pressure. We've probably all had our blood pressure checked. So the number that's on the top is the diastolic. This is where the ventricles are relaxing and filling with blood as the atria are contracting. So the atria are contracting, the blood is flowing into the ventricles. And then systolic is the opposite, where the ventricles contract and they're filling the relaxed atria with blood, right? So normally when one is high, the other is high, typically, not always, but typically. Hypertension is the condition in which the blood pressure is chronically high. So the heart is pumping too hard and extra pressure is being created on the blood vessels. All right, so the heart is only designed to pump at a certain intensity, at a certain rate. So if it's pumping too hard, there's too much pressure coming out. This pressure can damage blood vessels over time. This can lead to various complications, which include strokes. Almost half of American adults have hypertension, which to me is wild. Half of American adults. I don't know how, I think there's like 300 million people in the US now, which means about 150 million people have high blood pressure. There are about 43,000 annual deaths related to hypertension. And then there is the opposite, where you have what's called hypotension, where the blood pressure is too low and the heart isn't pumping hard enough. This is not as common, but it definitely exists. It can be caused by medications, including, ironically, medications to treat high blood pressure. It can push you too far the other direction. There is also something called orthostatic hypotension, which is where if you stand up too fast, you'll drop your blood pressure. So you have to be careful with that as well. But that's easier to treat than hypertension. So I sort of mentioned about blood pressure and the electrolytes. Okay, so this is largely what regulates blood pressure, sodium and potassium in particular. Now I want to talk about this a little bit because this is sort of an example of where the nutrition recommendations don't really vibe with what the research says. So currently the American Heart Association, and therefore the government, recommend that you eat less than 2,000 milligrams or 2 grams of sodium per day. But this is really not supported by the research. If you look at the collection of the highest quality studies, which is what meta-analysis means. So meta-analysis means that all of the best quality studies on any given topic were collectively analyzed together. So in terms of the level of evidence, this is like the highest level that you can get. So meta-analysis is pretty legit. It's pretty trustworthy. I'm going to trust a meta-analysis over anything else as a scientist. Okay. But the meta-analysis on sodium intake actually supports intake of more like 3,000 to 4,000 milligrams for most people. One of the studies included in this meta-analysis showed that restricting sodium actually increased blood pressure in healthy people. Okay, so I really want to make that point. So especially if you have no reason to limit your salt intake, you should not be doing so. All right, and to get more than 4,000 milligrams a day, by the way, I mean, this is someone who would live pretty much on fast food and ultra processed foods. Like if you're eating a pretty well-balanced diet, mostly whole foods, adding table salt to your food, preferably sea salt or Celtic salt, something like that, just because you're going to get more minerals in that, you're not going to get 5,000 milligrams a day. That's just not going to happen. So again, not necessary to overly restrict. The risk is what's called a J curve. So when the intake is too low or too high, that's where the risk. So people who are more in the middle of that curve, right, which is around that 3,000 to 4,000, that is ideal, and that's where the best outcomes were shown. Extreme restriction can lead to increased risk of atherosclerosis, which is generally the opposite of what you're told. That it can also negatively impact the kidneys. So last week we were talking about how the kidneys regulate sodium and water exchange. All right. So if you're not giving the kidneys adequate sodium for processing, they're not able to perform their job. And there are chemicals and things in the body that rely on sodium, the presence of sodium to occur. And you see how detrimental it is, or how important it is rather for proper heartbeat, okay? And the electrical system that is our heart to function. So even if you have existing high blood pressure, I do not recommend restricting below 2,000 a day. Should you eat 4,000 to 5,000? Probably not. But again, if you're a healthy person without high blood pressure, you do not need to be restricting. You should not be restricting. And even if you have high blood pressure, don't go below 2,000 milligrams. Okay. I don't care what your doctor says. That's just going to put that out there. So what's more effective for limiting blood pressure is staying hydrated, because hydration will literally dilute your blood. It will allow the blood to flow more smoothly through the blood vessels. Okay. So that's number one. That's easy. Number two is potassium. As I mentioned, the two are in a balance. So the more potassium you're eating in your diet, the less sodium you will absorb into your bloodstream. Okay. Later in this presentation, I will give you some examples of high potassium foods, but that's a really good place to start. Limiting sugar, all right, is good. So you guys might be starting to see a theme here that sugar is starting to take on a little bit more culpability than we really were giving it credit for before. Another very good home remedy for blood pressure is hibiscus tea. Hibiscus tea has been studied pretty extensively for its role in lowering blood pressure. So you can just drink a cup of hibiscus tea a day, and that will help to bring it down as well. All right, so coronary artery disease happens when the blood vessels get damaged. All right, so this is generally caused by the buildup of arterial plaques, which are made of cholesterol, but we'll get to this. But this doesn't necessarily implicate cholesterol as a bad thing, but it just shouldn't be accumulating in the blood vessels. But when you combine the cholesterol plaques with inflammation, this is where you start to get that damage to the blood vessels. Okay, so what happens is that oxygen can't get adequately delivered to the heart because the arteries start to become blocked. This is arteriosclerosis. I know there's a lot of big words tonight, but this can cause angina, the chest pain, and heart attacks as well. In certain arteries, this can also cause strokes. Diabetes, hypertension, lack of exercise, smoking. These are all causes. Risk factors are sleep apnea. All right. So and that's untreated sleep apnea. So if you're not using some sort of breathing device or corrective treatment for sleep apnea, that is definitely a risk factor, because you're literally not getting oxygen to anything, the brain, the heart, anywhere else, because you're not breathing enough. High triglycerides alone are an independent risk factor. So notice I'm not saying high LDL cholesterol. I'm not saying high total cholesterol. It's the triglycerides that typically are the highest risk. High homocysteine. Homocysteine is a blood value that is not a standard part of a cardiac workup. So that's one you have to ask for, but I do recommend that everybody be aware of what their homocysteine looks like. CRP, which is an inflammatory marker, you can ask for that as well. And then of course, stress. All right, common symptoms of CAD are this kind of combination of fatigue, chest pain, and shortness of breath. So if you have all three of those things together, that's what we're looking at. This is the leading cause of deaths from CVD. So among the CVD cases, this is the highest death rate of about 42. So 42% of people with CVD have CAD and they die, and that die from it. Okay, so arteriosclerosis, again, this is where the arteries get obstructed with plaque. It diminishes the blood flow. So this happens before you get CAD. So this is kind of like the precursor. This is the warning sign. It unfortunately goes unnoticed a lot because you don't really have symptoms until you're almost completely blocked. All right, so it is kind of, this is why you may have heard like heart disease is a silent killer, because you don't feel anything. You don't know what's happening until it's already pretty advanced in this stage. This can occur anywhere in the body. This can be in the heart, the brain, the legs. All right. It is caused by oxidative stress, which is caused by inflammation. There is some association with poor antioxidant status. So if you're not eating enough antioxidants in your diet, which again, we talked about this in the immune system, but antioxidants are those compounds in foods that help to keep that balance in the body, that homeostasis, and they help prevent oxidative stress. So when the body doesn't have enough antioxidants, it's not able to combat oxidative stress, and then you get inflammation in the arteries and elsewhere also. But for the purposes of this discussion, we're just talking about the arteries, but just remember that results in inflammation all over the body. Okay, so this is a useful guide for understanding your lab work. All right, so this is stuff that you can use to help figure out your own risk. The homocysteine, again, that's one you're gonna have to probably ask for, but here, those are the values that are risky. Low vitamin D level. So I've mentioned this before also, that everybody needs to know what their vitamin D is, all right? And me personally, while 30 is the lower end of the range, from the research that I've read and from my studies, the ideal is going to be closer to 50. So you really want to get your vitamin D up pretty good. CRP you'll have to ask for, but you don't want that to be over 2. Your A1C should be under 5.5. And it should be noted that if you are diabetic, if your A1C keeps going up, that this increases your risk by 23%. Each 1% increase. Okay, so a 1% increase is not a lot, but it's indicative that your blood sugar control is poor, and that in turn significantly increases your heart disease risk. So being diabetic compounds this risk. So we really want to control that A1C. This can also occur with insulin resistance, even if you don't have a diabetes diagnosis. You don't get diabetes diagnosis till your A1C is like 6.2, I think. So if you're anywhere between 5.5 and 6.2, that's insulin resistance, but not quite diabetes. That means you're kind of on your way there. So all more reason to get that under control. The lipids, so high triglycerides, as I mentioned before, HDL being low, LDL being high. And again, these are combination factors. So if you just have high LDL, that is not a risk factor. If you just have low HDL, that is not a risk factor. Triglyceride is the only one that's a risk factor by itself. All right. LPA, which is a new one that they're including, most of the time you have to ask for it. But this is a protein. It's called lipoprotein A. And this is really the one that will tell you how important these other ones are, how much these other things are going to contribute to your CVD risk. So this is one you can certainly ask for when you get your labs, when you get your lipids done. And then genetic testing, you can see if you have the MTHFR mutation. So this mutation affects how you metabolize folate and B12. And if you are deficient in those two nutrients, this will increase your homocysteine levels. So if you have high homocysteine, the good news is that it's very treatable. It's most likely due to either this mutation or a deficiency of those nutrients. So you can take folate and B12 and get your homocysteine down. You can also see if you have the APOE2 or APOE4 gene, which confer a little bit higher of a CVD risk level. Okay, so let's talk about statins. This is a sore subject for me. So statin drugs. So these are pretty commonly used to prevent CVD in high-risk individuals. And that is kind of a dubious term because that's sort of left to the doctor to decide what that means. And I have probably more patients on statins than not. And some of them were put on statins with very minimally elevated cholesterol levels. So really kind of ridiculous. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry just on this drug. So pharmaceutical companies are making a lot of money on statins. 11 million Americans take one. It's usually started when LDL goes over 130, despite there not being a whole lot of evidence for doing so. And in spite of their use, heart disease rates are not improving. So, yeah. But what they do is they block the conversion of something called acetyl-CoA to mevalonate. And so the body does not make cholesterol. And we talked in the liver section a bit about cholesterol and its importance. So just to refresh your memories, cholesterol is the body's Band-Aid system. It's the repair system. If anything is damaged, cholesterol is what repairs it. So suffice it to say, you need some cholesterol, and not having cholesterol is not a good thing. So what happens is that the body creates more LDL receptors to help use what the body has already stored instead of making more. So the liver does not make the cholesterol appropriately. Another problem is that statins will also lower HDL, which is our good cholesterol. This is the protective cholesterol. So this is the kind that actually helps to remove LDL from our systems and helps prevent those plaque buildups in the arteries. So you're taking away a very highly protective fat from the liver. All right. It also does not lower triglycerides, which, as I already mentioned, are a major CVD risk factor. So this combination of a low HDL, which again is your good cholesterol, plus a high triglyceride, that's a bigger risk than a high LDL. So again, if you have high LDL and everything else looks good, it doesn't, it's not a huge concern. You're not at much risk as it's made to seem. And yes, unfortunately, a lot of the studies on statin drugs kind of manipulate the data to where it seems like they're more effective than they really are. You have to look at things called relative risk and absolute risk, and they do not lower absolute risk. So some side effects of statin drugs would be muscle pain and weakness. That's the most common. And this is because it depletes a coenzyme that we need called CoQ10. So CoQ10 helps our mitochondria, our little energy factories, to make energy, to make ATP for us from calories. It's also an antioxidant. So statin depletes this drug. It affects the same pathway, that acetyl-CoA pathway that we need to make CoQ10. So everybody who is on a statin drug, because I cannot and will not tell you not to take your statin drugs, but at the very least, you need to be taking a supplement. I recommend the ubiquinol form. That's the most activated form, 100 to 200 milligrams daily. And this will help prevent the muscle pain. So if you're on statins and you've been experiencing this, this is why. Even if you're not having the muscle pain though, I tell people to take it because of the importance of that CoQ10. You need that for so many things, including, ironically, protecting the heart muscle from cell death. So you're giving someone a drug to help lower their risk of heart disease that depletes a protective nutrient that protects against heart disease. Like, does that make sense? Because I can't. I don't know. So yeah, take CoQ10 for sure if you're on a statin. Some other side effects which are not quite as common would be decreased libido, the sort of non-specific brain fog. It can increase your liver enzymes because, again, it's impacting the cholesterol production and affects some of the liver pathways. Chronic fatigue, and then abnormalities in blood sugar and blood pressure. Janelle, it's called ubiquinol. Right here, ubiquinol. I know it's a weird word, but yeah, ubiquinol is the form I recommend. You can get, it doesn't really matter what brand it is. You can buy ubiquinol in the drugstore. It's not hard to find, but I recommend that form over just standard CoQ10. Okay, so let's talk about diet and how diet can impact our heart disease risk. So first, we'll look at the foods that actually can promote heart disease. I've sort of touched on some of these already. Added sugars and refined sugars. So you really need to be reading like your cereals and your breads and your condiments. Look at how much sugar is added to those things. The new nutrition facts labels do have the added sugars on them, so it's easy to spot there. Oxidized oils, which basically means oils that have been inappropriately stored or cooked. These oils will increase oxidative stress. So fried foods will have oxidized oils. Packaged foods with a really long shelf life. So like whole grain flours, roasted nuts. Store these in a cool, dark place, whether it's in your fridge or a nice dark pantry. You need to monitor expiration dates. And if they taste funny, like I've definitely gone to eat a nut and it had this kind of like off taste. I can't really explain what that is, but it means that the oils that they were roasted in have gone rancid, and you don't want to eat that. Okay, so just monitor those expiration dates. Cooking oil that is not stored properly. So do not ever store your oil on the counter in the sun. So you need to keep it away. Don't keep it right next to the stove. It needs to be away from heat and light sources. All right, so the darkest corner, or keep them in a pantry or a cabinet, and don't reuse oil. For the love of God, do not reuse oil. Smoking and burning oil when cooking will do this. So make sure you're using the appropriate oil for the job. If you are trying to, I mean, again, I don't recommend that you do much frying, but sometimes, you know, we're in the South, maybe it's not realistic to say that. So if you are going to fry something, use a high smoke point oil. Avocado, grapeseed, coconut oil, these are all good high smoke point oils. So olive oil should not ever be used for high heat cooking. Olive oil is for like sauteing vegetables and that sort of thing. So in other words, if you put the oil in the pan and it starts smoking, you've already oxidized the oil. So you need to discard that, turn the pan down, let it cool down a little, and then start over. Okay, so you don't want any oils that are smoking. Sweetened drinks, particularly high fructose corn syrup, refined grains. It's kind of in the same category as the refined sugars, same concept. And you've stripped out all the fiber, all the heart healthy nutrients that are in the coating of that grain. All right. Processed meats like bacon and sausage and hot dogs, particularly if they've got the nitrites in them. We talked about that in the immune section. General overeating will promote heart disease, and excessive alcohol use, because again, that does damage the heart. Luckily, the list of things that prevent heart disease is much longer. So it's not all doom and gloom, people. I mentioned about the antioxidants. So these are arguably the most important. So you really need to be eating these antioxidant-rich foods to help keep that oxidative stress down, because that will protect not just your heart, but essentially every other system of your body as well. Fruits and vegetables, particularly your citrus fruits, your berries, your beets, leafy greens, cruciferous veggies, so broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, cabbage. Garlic and ginger are great ones. I cook with those on the regular. I just had a soup for dinner that had both of those in it. They're really delicious, and they confer a huge number of benefits. So lots of garlic and ginger when you're cooking, lots of herbs, preferably fresh ones if you can. And then omega-3 rich foods. I mentioned earlier, fatty fish, flaxseed, avocados, that kind of thing. Here's some high potassium foods. So again, these can help with blood pressure. They can help offset your body's absorption of sodium. So you want to try to include those regularly as well. To support healthy cholesterol, there's those omega-3s again. And it's the same concept, because the high omega-3 foods help to keep those fats from oxidizing in the body. So I didn't really mention that, but that's one benefit. Omega-3 is much slower to oxidize than omega-6. So you really want to bump up the omega-3s. Olive oil is a great one. Oats and other high fiber grains. So again, they should be the whole grain, not the refined. Beans, nuts and seeds. Coconut oil. This is a good one to kind of explain about the genetic thing. So coconut oil can raise your cholesterol if you have the APOE2 or E4 type gene. If you don't, it's actually beneficial for you. So this is a really interesting concept in terms of this is called nutrigenomics. This is kind of a newer science, but this explains why some diets work for some people and others not. Or why some people can eat keto, for example, and have really, really good cholesterol levels, where other people eat keto and their cholesterol levels go insane. So a lot of it has to do with these genes. Okay. So if you're not sure where you are, then be moderate with your coconut oil. Don't eat like spoonfuls of it. Okay. And then overall heart health, red grapes. You can do red wine, although I will say that this is another one where the study was very heavily manipulated, and the person made it seem like you could just drink a glass of red wine a day and get plenty of these compounds that you need, but really in reality you'd have to drink like gallons of wine and you would die from liver disease before you would ever get enough of that resveratrol. So red grapes are going to be a better source, but if you are going to drink alcohol, I would say red wine. It is typically the lowest in sugar. 1 to 2 cups of coffee a day is actually very, very beneficial for heart health. Coffee is a great source of antioxidants. The caffeine helps to dilate blood vessels, but the benefit is limited to a couple of cups a day. So if you're drinking like a pot a day, that's a bit too much. That's where you're going to start seeing arrhythmias and anxiety and that kind of thing. Organic soy foods, no glyphosate, please. An herb called hawthorn, and then turmeric. So you can add turmeric to your foods when you're cooking, or you can take a turmeric supplement. All right, so eggs. This is another sort of controversial food. They've gotten kind of a bad reputation as contributing to high cholesterol. And I guarantee every single one of you has been to your doctor and your doctor said, don't eat eggs, don't eat egg yolks because they have too much cholesterol. At least you've been told that if you've had high cholesterol. So most of the studies show that eggs have a pretty minimal impact on cholesterol. But again, this also has to do with that gene thing. So people with the APOE4 gene actually are affected more by the cholesterol in eggs. There is also some discussion of an increased risk of diabetes, but the studies are not consistent. So some studies have shown there is a higher risk. Some studies say there isn't. And that also may have to do with the genes, but that wasn't looked at in the studies. So we don't really know. They can actually improve HDL because there's a lot of really good nutrients in in the egg yolks that support healthy fat metabolism. The best bet is going to be to get organic, free range or pasture raised eggs because those chickens are eating better diets, and what those chickens are consuming goes into the eggs and goes into you. So you're gonna be a lot better off. And again, that may be some of the inconsistency with these studies. Are they looking at the pasture raised eggs versus like your factory farm eggs where the chickens live in little tiny cages and eat God knows what? Okay, so there's a huge difference in their diets, there's a huge difference in their lifestyles. So essentially healthier chickens make healthier eggs. So I don't typically recommend limiting eggs. I just recommend buying better ones. It's worth spending that extra $1 or $2. Even better if you know somebody who raises chickens and they can hook you up. So the cooking method matters. So don't combine your eggs with processed meats or refined carbohydrates. So the breakfast of eggs, bacon, and white toast is out the window. All right. And don't fry your eggs in butter because that combining with the saturated fat can potentially have some implications. So you want to do something like eggs and fruit, or if you're going to have a bread product, make sure it's a good multi-grain or whole grain type toast, like the Dave's Killer bread or the Ezekiel bread, something of that nature. And then you can see all of the valuable nutrients that egg yolks have. So the egg whites don't have much. Egg whites just have protein, basically. So all of those nutrients are in the yolk, and that includes choline, which you need for brain signaling and your cell membranes. It's got antioxidants, it's got B vitamins, and some protein. So they're really pretty nutritious, and you can pretty safely eat 2 eggs a day and not have to worry about any increased risk, even if you have the APOE genotype. Yeah, ghee would be okay. Yeah, I think ghee would be fine for frying eggs in. You could also use I like to use a little coconut oil. I just think that tastes really good, but that's just me. So some of the things you can do. So even if you have the genetic predisposition, even if you have family history, even if you have diabetes, whatever, these are things that you can control. All right. Drinking more water, trying to eat a mostly whole foods diet. I'm a big Fan of the 80-20 philosophy. So 80% of the time you eat whole foods, and then if you need a little bit of wiggle room, that's fine. But your diet should be mostly whole foods, mostly plants, with your animal proteins worked in. Regular physical activity. You need at least 3 hours a week for the best results, for the most heart protection. Get more antioxidants in your diet. Get less sugar in your diet. Don't smoke or vape. If you need to lose weight, work on that. Manage your stress. Okay. Very important. And establish good sleep habits. And I know all of these some of these are kind of oversimplified. It's not like just start sleeping better or just stop worrying about everything. Like, I realize it's a little more complex than that, but it's implied that, you know, you work with someone who can help you with those particular things. Okay. So that is the end of the actual presentation. I'm going to jump over to the comments because I think I saw some things popping up. And feel free to type any other questions you have. We've got about 10 minutes to spare. So you're free to hop in with a question, or you can just say it out loud if that's easier. That's fine too. Okay, we addressed that. Oh, that's interesting, Connie, that the LPA was different multiple times. Yeah, it's different. It's probably different labs and they're different methods, which really doesn't make it less confusing at all. Spaghetti squash chow mein. Oh, that sounds good. I love spaghetti squash, actually. I had some last night for dinner myself. Do you have a recommendation for genetic testing for the LPA? I would recommend going through Ben Lynch's service, which is called, let me see if I can remember what his is. Because they give you a really good analysis. Like, genetic testing is only as useful as your ability to interpret it. A lot of them, you do a genetic test and then it just sends you a bunch of stuff that you can't understand. So he has Strategene is what it's called. I'm going to type it in the comments so you can see the spelling. But Strategene actually gives you a report that helps you understand your genes. That will also test you for the MTHFR mutation. It'll test you for APOE, various other, like celiac. I mean, it'll test you for all these different genes. So I think it's good. You know, especially if you really want to kind of deep dive into your own health and tackle some things that could potentially become problems later. If you want to like get on them ahead of time, genetic testing is a really, really great way to do that. So yeah, so Strategene is the one that I like. You can do 23andMe, but again, you'll have to have that run through a secondary type of interpretation because you won't be able, it looks like gibberish, like you won't understand any of it. It's just numbers and letters. Okay, anything else? Anybody else got any questions?
I was just gonna ask. The doctors are not very vocal with their recommendations actually don't follow what we think.
Connie, we can't hear you. You're like, sound like you're in a box really far away.
How's this? Is any better?
A tiny bit.
All right, never mind.
No, well, that whatever you just said, I heard that.
Still?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know, we've been going through something with my husband for the last 3 months.
Oh, you're gone again. Sorry.
Okay.
Can you type it?
No, it's not worth it.
Oh, sorry. It just cuts in and out too much. So
Okay. Never mind.
Sorry. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we're good to go. As always, you guys are free to email questions if you have any, but thank you so much for joining tonight and we'll see you again next week. Have a great night, everybody.